I'm not as excited. He said I'm not as excited.
Starting now.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Aloha. My name is Dory Rand, and I'm president of Woodstock Institute. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Encouraging Savings, How Hawaii and Illinois Eliminated Their Asset Tests. Two advocates from each of these states will be describing their successful campaigns to end TANF asset limits in their states earlier this year. Our panelists are Lucy Milani of Heartland Alliance and the Illinois Asset Building Group, Dan Lesser of Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, Brent Kakasako of the Hawaii Alliance for Community-Based Economic Development, and Ali'i George of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I'll tell you more about them later. First, I have two housekeeping matters. If you have any technical problems, please call Sarah Hart at 312-368-1168. That number again is 312-368-1168. Second, if you have a question, please type it into the box on the label on the right side of your screen. We will answer as many questions as we can. If there are questions that we don't have time to answer, the presenters will answer them by email afterwards. An archive of this webinar, including the audio and the slides, will be posted tomorrow at www.povertylaw.org. In addition, you'll receive an email with a link to the webinar and other resources, including fact sheets, FAQs, and hearing testimony. So once again, my name is Dory Rand. I'm president of Woodstock Institute, a nonprofit research and policy organization focused on fair lending, wealth creation, and financial systems reform. Before we get to our panelists, I want to put the subject of today's webinar into the broader context of policies that encourage low-income people to save, and also tell you about our previous efforts to eliminate the TANF asset limit in Illinois by administrative rule. There is growing recognition that it takes more than a paycheck to escape poverty and become self-sufficient. Making the transition from barely getting by to getting ahead usually involves accumulating some savings and building assets. But state-administered public benefit programs, such as Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, often discourage and penalize savings and assets of over $1,000 or $2,000. While income eligibility rules are required for public benefit programs, states should take advantage of the flexibility provided under federal law to encourage savings and asset accumulation. When Congress made the TANF program a block grant as part of welfare reform in 1996, it gave states the authority to set or eliminate asset limits. Early on, only Ohio and Virginia took advantage of that option, but now 8 states have eliminated TANF asset tests altogether, and several more have revised TANF asset tests to raise the asset limit and or to exempt specific assets such as vehicles and retirement or college savings accounts. States can change asset limit policies either by legislation or administrative rules. There's more background on this in a paper I wrote for the Clearinghouse Review in 2007. There's also great information on newamerica.net's Asset Limits website and CFED.org's Assets and Opportunities Scorecard and Policy Guide. Now, in Illinois, we exempted individual development accounts approved by the Illinois Department of Human Services, IDHS, from the TANF asset limits in 2001. And then we exempted retirement accounts when we adopted categorical eligibility for food stamps. And we began trying to eliminate the $2,000 TANF asset test via administrative rule starting in 2004. Politically, this rule change requires IDHS, the Governor's Budget Office, and members of the Illinois General Assembly's Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, or JCAR, to approve. We made several unsuccessful attempts. After finally winning over the governor's office in 2009, we attempted to pass the rule change again, but we got shot down by JCAR, which claimed that IDHS did not have the authority to propose such a rule. And it didn't help at all that Governor Blagojevich had just gotten arrested. Meanwhile, when we geared up again in 2013, we decided to take a new tactic. And here to talk about that with us is our first panelist, Lucy Malani. She is Senior Policy Associate at Heartland Alliance here in Chicago. She also serves as coordinator of the Illinois Asset Building Group, of which I'm a proud founding member. IABG is a statewide coalition committed to expanding access to the tools people need to build financially secure futures for themselves and their children. Take it away, Lucy.
Thank you, Dory. So we are really excited to share with you our lessons learned from our successful campaign to remove the asset test from TANF. And I think we have some different levels of experience on the call with this, this issue area. So I'm going to provide, before I kind of jump into the Illinois-specific lessons, I'm just going to provide a quick overview of some of the basic concepts that we're going to be talking about and expand a little bit on what Dory has already shared. So the first big thing is understanding TANF. So very quickly, TANF stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. It's a cash assistance program for needy children living with their parents or other relatives. And there is a 5-year time limit. There's also a work activity requirement, which makes it a unique program in many ways. The work requirement means that, participants, recipients of TANF benefits must complete 30 hours of work-approved activities per week. The other thing I think that's important when thinking about leading a campaign that involves changes to TANF is that it's become a very politicized program. It's often referred to as welfare, and with that there's a lot of different misunderstandings and it's made it a slightly unpopular program politically, you could say. So what is an asset limit? An asset limit is a limit on the amount of assets, including savings, a household can have as a condition of eligibility for public benefits. So we'll talk a little bit about how there's asset limits on SNAP, on TANF. There's also asset limits on Medicaid, Social Security, Disability, and LIHEAP in many states. And depending on your state, the asset limit ranges from $1,000 to $10,000, and but there can often be many exemptions. So Dory spoke about efforts to exempt individual development accounts in Illinois. Your state may have certain exemptions to the asset limit. And again, it varies state by state. Caseworkers determine a person's assets through what is called an asset test. So often asset limit and asset test are interchangeable. So you'll probably hear both as we speak about it. So the overall impact of asset limits, when we talk about successful messaging that we use, some of these things come up. But one, families are forced to deplete their savings and sell assets such as a second car before they become qualified for any assistance. Families are prevented from building much needed savings to weather emergencies and build financial security, which is often counterproductive to the aims of the program. And families are getting the wrong kind of message. So what research has shown is that any type of asset limit, regardless of what the size is, prevents families from saving because they think that they're going to be perceived as less eligible. And finally, states incur substantial administrative costs from performing an asset test. So who determines asset limits? Very quickly, states set asset limits for SNAP, TANF, and medical assistance. At the federal level, they've been given the power to do that. And asset limits may be set in statute or by administrative rule. So if you're just beginning your campaign, we encourage that you take a look at where your state is. And I want to give a quick shout out to the New America Foundation, which has launched a great website about 6 months ago, I believe, which I'm just going to take you to the site. which if you go to assetlimits.newamerica.net, you can pull up a map that shows what the asset limit is in each state, just by scrolling through. And what you'll see on this website is that there's an interactive map here that shows that there's been a lot of changes and we've had a lot of progress on this issue over time. So this is going to give you a history of kind of what's happened in your state, what's happened in other states. So you can see where people are having successes, where there's still work to be done. Let me just go back. Okay, oops. I have to go back. Sorry, everyone. So very quickly, the progress that's been made, 36 states have eliminated the SNAP asset limit. 24 states have eliminated the asset limit on medical assistance, and 8 states have currently eliminated the TANF asset limit. So what happened in Illinois this past year? We have, as Dory mentioned, had a number of different efforts to remove the asset test administratively, the last one being in 2009. And this year we set about, actually in late 2012, we set about trying to think about how we might want to go about it this next time. And so we looked at, okay, we approached the department and talked to them about removing the asset limit administratively. And what we found was that if it was going to happen through administrative rules, the lead on it really needed to be the department, where, and given their capacity, they and we felt that the best approach would be legislatively, because we're doing the list, and the advocates are the ones that have to really drive it forward. And so the first decision made was that we would do a legislative approach versus administrative, which had its pros and cons. Secondly, we wanted to think about, okay, were we going to try to expand the asset limit? When in Illinois, it was $2,000 to $3,000, depending on family size, or were we going to eliminate it? And we decided that we were going to go with a complete elimination, because if we hadn't, we would have lost one of our biggest arguments, which was the administrative cost savings. And for our state, in the budget crisis that we're in, where there's a lot of constraints, that was a huge argument for us. Second, we looked at who our team contained, and we knew that if we were going to address issues, an issue related to TANF, we needed the TANF experts who have been working on this issue for some time, that know the complications of the program. And so it was both asset building advocates and TANF advocates coming together to move this issue forward. And I think that the expertise from each of those teams really led itself to a strong campaign. We also thought through our sponsors. So we decided to introduce a bill in both the House and the Senate, and we chose the chairs of the Human Services Committee, which oversees the TANF program, has the most knowledge of programs within the Department of Human Services, and we chose to introduce 2 bills, understanding that it was going to be an uphill battle, and if one of the bills died, we would still have another bill in the other chamber. And finally, a big decision that we made was that we decided not to work with media. We decided to try to keep this under the radar, and this was because we knew that there's a lot of misconceptions about TANF, and that one of our biggest hurdles in convincing legislators to vote for this was talking through what the perceptions are in their district about TANF. So we really tried to keep this under the radar, out of the media. So very quickly, I'm going to talk about some messages that work before I hand it off to Dan Walker, who's going to talk about how we communicated when concerns came up about the policy. So very quickly, some of the basic messages that worked off the bat was that asset limits are contrary to the goals of the program. You know, we're trying to get TANF families financially secure. We're trying to move them off the program, and an asset limit just does not allow them to build the emergency savings that they need. it's forcing families to deplete existing savings, however small that might be. It's also not promoting good savings behavior, and I think that this message certainly worked with some more of our conservative legislators. And finally, we found that it would save the state $1 million. Dan's going to talk about how we came up with that number, but definitely the cost savings piece to the state was huge. Messages that we thought might work, but we found actually didn't really work that well in our state or just weren't that persuasive, was what other states have done. So going in saying that, 7 other states have removed the asset test really didn't do too much for us. And the other one was that we thought that, well, saying that it aligns with the SNAP and Medicaid rules, which have already eliminated that asset test, didn't do too much. I don't think the efficiency, while the cost savings argument was persuasive, saying that, well, we should just remove it because it's efficient, wasn't very persuasive. So obviously we tailored every message to the specific legislator, tried to understand as much as we could about the legislator, but overall these were the messages that were persuasive. And I am going to hand off to Dan Lesser.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. Our next panelist is Dan Lesser. Dan is the Director of Economic Justice at Chicago-based Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, a legal and policy advocacy organization that works to advance justice and opportunity for low-income people. Dan.
Thanks, Dory. So I'm going to pick up where Lucy left off with our work in the General Assembly. And first thing I want to talk about is the 4 kind of concerns or counter-arguments that were made and how we responded to them. The first one, anytime you propose to do something that helps people receive public benefits, kind of the first thing that goes through a lot of legislators' minds is, well, will this open the door to fraud? And in this context, the question was, isn't the asset limit needed to ensure that only the truly needy receive assistance? And this was such an important point that we talked to, I think, every legislator who we met with about this. We proactively brought this issue up, knowing that it was on their minds, even if it wasn't articulated. And the argument we had was that the asset limit is no longer needed after welfare reform. So after talking about all the positive advantages of saving and encouraging savings, then we got to this point that this asset test really doesn't serve any purpose anymore. And the reason for that is because TANF has stringent work requirements that ensure that only the truly needy will seek to be on the program. So the asset test is no longer needed. And we explain that by explaining the work requirement and that TANF recipients have to complete 30 hours of approved work-related activities per week to receive a grant. And when you do the math on that, a family of 3 in Chicago, which receives a grant of $432 a month, this basic grant, would be getting the equivalent of $3.35 per hour of work. And we said that this is the safeguard, and this is why no one with significant savings would apply for this program. And that really went over with people. They really understood that. And we also were able to say that the numbers prove this, since according to the Department of Human Services, there were only 8 cases last year that were over the asset limit and canceled. So the second argument or concern, really argument, was why should we make it possible for TANF recipients to save when people who are working and living paycheck to paycheck can't afford to save? And this is kind of the traditional attempt to drive a wedge between the poor and the working class. And we didn't take the bait on this. We just stuck with our message about saving. And I think this was very effective to say saving money is hard for everyone. We shouldn't add barriers to saving for anyone. And this would eliminate a barrier that prevents families on TANF from saving. The third counter-argument was, rather than eliminate the asset limit or the asset limit, why not just raise it or carve out exceptions? And so why not go to, say, a $10,000 asset limit, or the things that we talked about like college savings or a second car? Why not just exempt those? And our strong counter-argument to that was that if you have any kind of asset test, you're not going to get the $1 million in administrative savings. And also just that we're still sending, as Lucy said, any asset limit sends the wrong message about saving. And then the last argument was that was skepticism that there really would be a cost savings, you know, and that the state would lay people off. And we said, no, they won't be laid off, but taxpayers will still save $1 million in wasted administrative expenses. And the caseworkers can be much better used to meet legal deadlines like processing time, and also just frees their time up, which could be better spent helping other families. So the next thing I want to cover is kind of how we moved this and worked with the state, and then how we moved it through the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate, and just some final tips. And some of this was lessons learned, some of this was just applying lessons that we've learned in the past. So in terms of working with the State Department of Human Services, as with any other legislation which we bring forth that has to do with their agency, we work closely with them from start to finish. Even if we're not on the same side, we work closely with them. And one thing that's important to realize is that the agency is not monolithic. There's a lot of different people working there with different views. You've got the kind of higher level political staff. You've got the career policy staff who really understand the programs, the budget office, the legal department, the legislative liaison, and then the leadership itself, the secretary. And they're all going to get a piece of this, and they're all, you know, viewing it from different perspectives, and you've got to sort of understand that and work with it. Now, one thing that's important to do right away, early on, is to agree on the language. And this doesn't mean get them to agree to your bill, but just get them to agree that your bill does what you want it to do, so that you're not later fighting over the language itself. The cost estimate, we've referenced this a couple times. So what happened was that the state agency did a cost estimate that they're spending almost $1 million worth of caseworker time checking TANF families' assets. And this was based on their assumption that caseworkers spent 10 minutes on each case doing the asset check. And, you know, that's a very reasonable sounding assumption. So that was a pretty unassailable cost estimate. Now, further things in working with the state, of course, we seek their support on the bill. They were originally neutral on the bill, even though their write-up was glowing. They were neutral, and but we worked hard and really sort of went over staff's head and went straight to the secretary and got them to switch their position to support. And one of the side benefits of that was that it meant that the governor would not veto the bill. Not that we thought he would, but you never know. So the House and the Senate. So first the House. And here I would just say it's really important to understand the political dynamics of the chamber that you're in. So in the Illinois House, we've got a strong Democratic majority. 71 Democrats, 47 Republicans. However, 12 of the Democrats are considered are what we call targets, meaning that they're new and or in swing districts, and they're not permitted by the Speaker to vote in favor of anything that's the least bit controversial. So they couldn't vote for this, and so we really started 59-59. And so our primary audience was moderate Republicans. We had to, you know, get Republicans on this bill for it to pass. And to get Republican votes, you've got to have Republican co-sponsors. And we found that members of the committee that heard the bill, you know, who were, you know, more oriented towards human services and also just, you know, got to learn more about the bill, were briefed on it, and also women legislators were more receptive. And really, this thing all starts with good staff analysis. And we work closely with the, well, the Democratic and Republican staff on putting together solid analysis. We don't get to see the analysis, but we supply them with information, meet with them and stuff. We got a diverse group of co-sponsors, diverse by party, by gender, by ethnicity, and by geographic region. We talked to everyone. We didn't make any assumptions about who would be for or against this. Our message about savings, I think, has a lot of appeal to people across the political spectrum. And we didn't take anything for granted. We talked to as many members as we could. And another really important point is we met with people we knew were opponents. We gave them a chance to vent, and we found that it sort of diffused their opposition, you know, to the point where they would, you know, hopefully not speak on the floor, you know, in a rabid manner. So that's always worth doing. Now in the Senate, we had different dynamics, an even bigger Democratic majority, 40 Democrats, 19 Republicans, and a really strong ideological split between the parties. And the ranking Republican on the committee hated this bill. We knew we couldn't get any Republican votes, so our focus was just on the Democrats. and in particular the downstate and suburban swing districts who are cautious about supporting something that could be perceived as being soft on welfare. So we use the same basic message with them, again stressing the positive value of savings, trying to reassure them on the politics. We had a House vote by now, so we could point to members from their districts who had voted for it. That helped. We met with 39 of the 40 Democrats, all but the President of the Senate, and we also lined up a really strong array of floor speakers. So here are just a few other tips. I've already referenced our meetings with legislative staff. Very important to work with them. They write the analysis. Often that's the only thing the member will see, or usually that's the only thing which they'll see and know about the bill, so it's just critical. They're also privy to party caucuses and private meetings. That's where all the real debate and decisions get made, and you can't be in those rooms. So, but you can get information from staff. They draft amendments. They do a lot of things, so you've got to really have a strong relationship with them. Get sponsors invested in legislation. We did that. You do that by showing it has legs, by going out and signing up a lot of co-sponsors, and that gets them real motivated. And in fact, our cost estimate, we didn't ask for the cost estimate, our sponsor did, and I think we got a much better one because she did the asking and not us. So that's important. An ally in leadership to help clear procedural hurdles. There are all kinds of procedural hurdles to getting a bill actually through the whole process. A lot of places they can get snagged, and if you've got someone in leadership, they can really smooth it out for you. Know the parliamentary rules. So the first time this was put up for a vote in the House, we lost by 5 votes, but our sponsor knew to move for postponed consideration, which meant that the votes were taken off the board, and she was able to bring it up later. But fortunately, before the votes came off the board, one of the staff used their iPhone, took a picture of it, so we knew who had voted for and against, and we knew who to focus on. And so that was key. And then lastly, sometimes you need some luck. The bill passed by 2 votes in the House and by 2 votes in the Senate, and a lot of wacky things happened at the last minute, but fortunately we ended with victory.
All right, and congratulations. So now we're going to turn to our friends in Hawaii. Our panelists are Brent Kakisako and Auli'i George. Brent is Executive Director for the Hawaii Alliance for Community-Based Economic Development, or HACBED, which is a nonprofit intermediary that works to build the capacity of families and communities across the state of Hawaii and provide ongoing support so that they have choice and control to push for economic, environmental, and social justice and leave their legacy for future generations. And I was pleased to have an opportunity to visit Brent and his friends back in 2008. Auli'i is a public policy advocate at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, which is a quasi-state agency that works to improve the conditions of indigenous Native Hawaiians. She works on issues related to human services, economic self-sufficiency, foster care, and economic development. Go ahead, Hawaii.
Thank you, Dora, and it was great to have you in Hawaii. So we also invite anyone else on this call, if they're interested, to please email us. So yeah, thank you for having us on this call, and I'm humbled to be here today along with Auli'i to share the collective efforts of our partners, which led to the elimination of asset limits for TANF recipients in our state, but which actually started from the stories of families themselves. So in our work, we're very fortunate to work and have spaces to talk story, we call it in Hawaii, or have conversations with families. And in these conversations, we gather stories to determine what's working well and what are the challenges that families are facing. I think one story that is very relevant to this is a number of the families talked about how they would quickly spend any money they would have in order to maintain their TANF benefits. They didn't see any need, or there was no incentive to save. A lot of them talked about, I want to save for my kids, I want to save for myself to go back to school, but what's the point? I mean, we're just going to quickly hit that fiscal cliff. So for the purposes of this webinar, that was some powerful stories, but many of the stories also talked about wealth for us is beyond just the financial. It's relationships with each other, with our environment, and with our community. And so the term ho'ovaivai was raised as defining wealth in Hawaiian, but what it alludes to is that the word vai means water, and so when a community has water, it was considered wealthy because it could take care of the people in the community and the community itself. And so it was basically a form of self-sufficiency. So fittingly, that became the name of the network of a number of national and state partners from a variety of backgrounds that were looking to raise the vision that families talked about in their stories. So the Ho'ovaivai network is a loose group. We try to keep it very decentralized, kind of a true network that is established to leverage collective organizational strengths of the different partners. And many of these activities include gathering story and data from families to inform broader policy, and in the process raise the awareness of the importance of asset building in supporting the creation of genuine wealth. So the network kind of got its start in 2004 at a conference entitled Families Defining Economic Success. And over the course of the last 10 years, it's been integral in creating a broader policy agenda, which is the blue book in the middle, and then a specific roadmap. And these gradually help to build momentum around asset building policy with the stories of families interspersed throughout all of these. And we show these just to demonstrate the process it took for actual legislation to bubble up. So this is kind of the framework, broadly speaking, in regards to asset building and as it specifically applies to distinct legislative actions. So what ended up starting as stories from families began to build momentum in roadmaps and policy briefs was the recognition by public officials the importance of this issue in pushing it on a legislative level. And so a caucus of 12 legislators took this upon themselves, both from the House and the Senate, from different, as Dan was talking about, from different parties. And from this came a task force, the Hawaii State Asset Building and Financial Education Task Force. So this specifically was formed to develop policy recommendations around financial education, children's savings accounts, and asset limits. So it was very specific in what it looked at from that very broad framework. So the task force was a pretty large one and consisted of a variety of members, not only legislators, but also other city and county family and self-sufficiency program, Department of Human Services, Hawaiian Community Assets, Hawaii Community Foundation, University of Hawaii at Manoa, and a large number of other partners. The task force ended up coming out with recommendations that serve to become part of the legislative record, and it thus became an invaluable tool to address potential opposition, and also serves even now as an official resource for ongoing asset building policy initiatives. So to put paper to action, the next step was spearheaded by specific groups from the network, but with the more specific focus on advocacy. So for example, Legal Aid, Society of Hawaii, Appleseed Center for Justice, National Association for Social Workers, University of Hawaii, Bridge for Hope, and others. And Hawai'i will jump in here to provide more context on that.
Aloha everyone, this is Auli'i. I just wanted to add more to Brent's presentation. He pretty much went over how we kind of laid the foundation to provide kind of like a seamless support network to push for asset limit reform legislation in Hawaii. And so what developed throughout the whole Hawai'i network was network partners who decided to all put in bills for our 2012 legislative session. So it was really an exciting process. So essentially, network partners introduced asset limit reforming legislation. And the bills were either to increase the asset limit or eliminate the asset limit altogether. And so as you can see on the slides, those are some examples of the proposed legislation. And a lot of the bills that were recommended also came from some of the research that we got from our national advocacy network partners, including CFED. So there are 3 bills during the 2012 legislative session to increase the asset limit to 10,000, 15,000, or 15,000 to eliminate the asset limit. And there was also a resolution, which was really interesting, which required our Department of Human Services to study asset limits and what the fiscal implications of it would be. And to just show an example of our work with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, we are considered a network partner. And so this is kind of the role that we played, and we felt that we could contribute to the overall momentum of asset limit reform in Hawaii. So what we did was we really developed a message consistent with the network partners. We felt that was really important. At the same time, we would include messages that would indicate how it would impact our beneficiaries that we serve as the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So that was really helpful. We kept in contact with the network partners, including the whole Hawai'i network and CFED, just to be all on the same page and see what's going on, and whether a hearing was coming up, whether there's opposition somewhere, and how we can work together to inform and educate and share some of the good positive message as far as asset limit reform. We have a board of trustees that set our policy. And so what we did was we updated our board of trustees, and they are an elected body. So they have a lot of political influence at the legislature, and so sometimes they provide recommendations, or sometimes they would directly go to legislators that they know just to kind of talk about asset limit reform and get their support. We, as a staff member, I met with supportive legislators, and usually I would get an idea about who we needed to talk to, who we needed to provide more information to, which legislators may be on the fence as far as asset limit reform. So that was really helpful. So even though none of the bills passed during the 2012 legislative session, what did pass was the resolution which required the Department of Human Services to conduct an asset limit study as it relates to all public assistance programs. So essentially, the director, Patricia McManaman, of our Department of Human Services, she really wanted their department to take a comprehensive review of all public assistance programs and their asset limits, just to make sure everything was okay. So it was a really positive thing that happened once the resolution passed. So the director, because she was really excited about asset limit reform, she was well educated on the issue, she decided to convene a small work group of community members and some of her staff to provide recommendations and determine what the fiscal implications are to asset limits, to all public assistance programs. So what happened from the asset limit study, it was actually really exciting because the work group comprised of network partners and members, which we were able to heavily influence the content and outcome of the report. We were able to provide the working group with data and research from state and national advocacy groups including CFED. CFED was used in their report. A lot of their data was used in the report to help with our findings. And through the working group, there was a consensus to recommend to eliminate asset limits for TANF programs. So once the study was completed, we knew that the director of DHS, or Patricia McManaman, would be very supportive of eliminating asset limits. So that was kind of the driving force. And so she worked with the governor's office to introduce a bill in the governor's legislative package. And our governor's legislative package is usually, once a bill is in there, there's a high probability that it will pass. So we felt like there was a lot of positive things that came out of that. So there was a bill introduced in the governor's package, and it was to eliminate the asset limit. So some of the key points that, as a network partner and as a network kind of put together, was a message. And so we wanted to make sure that we articulated to everyone, and including the decision makers, that asset limit reform would benefit the state as a whole and our neediest populations. So, so some of these examples were previously discussed in the by Dan and Lucy, but I just wanted to briefly go over some that probably weren't really talked about. So TANF recipients are eligible to receive the federal EITC, in which they're entitled a maximum of around $5,000. So instead of families having to get rid of it, families can save these funds. So the federal EITC, which is a very good federal anti-poverty program, is there for lifting people out of poverty. And so this was a really good point to make, especially when we're testifying. So another network message that we used a lot was that there are safeguards to prevent fraud and abuse. And so one of the main points we wanted to make is that there are very strict income requirements to be eligible for TANF. And so you can't have millionaires applying for the program and getting the funds. And then we also have a really rigorous application process for TANF. And so sometimes that's a deterrent from people actually applying and trying to get it. So the network messages were really important, and through that, the asset limit bill became law, and that's us, Brent on the left and me on the right in the picture. And so Act 18 was signed by the governor on April 18th, and the law was implemented immediately. So it's really exciting. We got support from the network and beyond. So these are just a few of the members of the network and people that we've been working with throughout our state to help make this happen. So I just wanted to name a few: Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women, Bridge to Hope, Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, Legal Aid Society, Hawaii Women's Coalition, Catholic Charities, Goodwill, ACLU. So these are some really good network partners that we were working with. And then some of our lessons that we've learned is that the strongest policies were developed from the stories told by Hawaii families. So a lot of legislators and decision makers really want to know anecdotal stories about how this piece of legislation will impact families in Hawaii. And we have a very unique state because we have a number of, we have 8 islands that we have to look over and manage. So every decision maker wants to know how it will impact their island. We also know that we need to be proactive and build relationships in our community and consider the network approach, because it really works for us. So it may work for your state. We also felt that what's really important is to be accurate and do the research and data gathering. And a lot of our national partners have helped us in that. And of course, you always want to be factual. You want to do your research and get the facts straight and create really good talking points and be consistent with the message. So mahalo, everyone, and thank you for hearing us. And I'll pass it on to
Dora.
Back to me. So thank you, Brennan, Ali, and congratulations on your effective stories, network, task force study, and ultimate TANF asset limit victory. What we're showing you now on screen are the links to some of these additional resources that several of us have mentioned, including the New America Foundation's asset limit website, the CFED Assets and Opportunities Scorecard, and the CFED network. And they're in the process of developing a new group to work specifically on asset limit reform. Also, we want to share with you our contact information. So you can reach any of us by email or by phone. And as we said, we'll answer any questions that we don't have time to get to afterwards. And all of this information, as I said, is going to be posted to the povertylaw.org website tomorrow. So now we're going to go to questions. Okay. First up, the question is there any group working to expand tax credits, EITC, et cetera, child tax credit in California or nationwide, and ensure that benefit screening tool is incorporated into VITA sites?
I can take
Lucy.
So there are a number of national groups working to expand tax credits at the federal level, including the child tax credit and the EITC. CFED, this is an issue on CFED's policy agenda, the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, and the National Community Tax Coalition. The CFED does have the network that Dory mentioned has a lead state organization in almost every state that is working on asset building policies. So I would encourage you to go to the website and look up the California group, who is most likely working on state EITC expansion. As far as incorporating benefit screening into the resources provided at VITA sites, there are a number of VITA organizations that do that, especially those that are one-stop centers. But I would refer you to the National Community Tax Coalition that works with VITA sites across the country, especially on these kinds of programmatic issues, and their website is tax-coalition.org.
Thanks, Lucy. And can you also share, the next question is, share our bill numbers with the audience? What was the Illinois?
So the Illinois bill number was House Bill 2262. If you go to ilga.gov, you can type in HB 2262 and the bill will come up. When we send out the recording and the slides from this webinar, we will also send out a copy of the fact sheet and an FAQ that we use during our advocacy campaign, and that has the bill number on it as well. But again, it was HB 2262. And then Hawaii, do you want to, I guess you had a number of different bills prior to the change that you had shared.
What was the number of the
our
successful
bill? Was HB 868, and it's in the it's in our PowerPoint, so we can always reference the PowerPoint as well.
Thank you. And Wade, do we have any other questions?
Can you tell us more about that? So the other question we have is Illinois specific. Can you tell us about the partisan divisions you encountered? It seems like one of the biggest reasons you were able to succeed is that the Democrats have enough control of those houses. The Republican opposition didn't matter that much. I can take this if you want to fill in, Dan. So
yeah, go ahead.
I think, Dan talked about it was really important for us to be aware of the political dynamics in Illinois. Obviously, we have a democratically controlled House and Senate, but we had Republican and Dem support in the House and only Democratic support in the Senate. In the House, Dan mentioned how there's a number of Democrats who are considered quote-unquote target legislators, where the speaker kind of has a lot of control over whether they're going to vote for or against controversial bills. So we knew right away that they were going to be, they weren't going to be able to vote for this bill, which made it so that we had to get Republican support. Also, the state, when you look at downstate Democrats, both in the House and the Senate, they're often more conservative than some of our other legislators, even some of our Republican legislators, so we had to take that into account. And that's why when we were looking for co-sponsorship, not only did we think about getting Republicans and Democrats on the bill, we tried as hard as we could to get some downstate Democrats on the bill as well, when possible. Dan, do you have anything?
Yeah, as we both talked about the targets, we really started out with 59 votes in the House, and you need 60 to pass the bill. So we needed to get more Republicans on than Democrats that we lost, putting the targets aside. So our audience really there was Republican moderates. That's who we had to persuade. And I don't recall now how many voted for it, 7 or 8.
About
like
7, yeah.
But it was so, you know, even though on paper the House is heavily Democratic, the reality was that we were starting from a tie, and we needed, like I said, more Republicans than Democrats we lost. So, our messaging was, as I said, it was, I think it appealed to people across the board. Some of the most conservative members of the House voted for this bill, or, wanted to, came close to, I should say. But so it really didn't, it seems like it, but it didn't really break down so much on partisan lines, I would say, at all in the House. In the Senate, it's just a different dynamic. Like I said, you've got to look at the dynamics. In the Senate, there's so few Republicans, 19 Republicans, 40 Democrats, that they are just, very ideologically to the right. A lot of this has to do with redistricting, which the Democrats controlled. So even though there's 40 Democratic senators, several of them are from districts that traditionally were Republican. So they're, swing districts, and so they're cautious. And they don't want to vote for something that could hurt them politically. So we had, I think as Lucy said, the downstate Democrats and those who live in swing suburban districts, are basically as conservative or more conservative than the House moderate Republicans. So this a bill that needed bipartisan support in the House, and in the Senate we had to kind of bridge that gap and get members who were very cautious about supporting something like this.
And before we go to the next question, just the only thing, just one more addition is that, when we talked about responding to opposition, the one thing that's really hard to respond to is when a legislator says that because of perceptions in their district, they can't, because they're politically vulnerable. Like, that's the hardest thing that we came up against as far as, well, how do you respond to that? Because there really isn't a good response to that.
We have another question that's kind of long, but I'm going to try and pull out the gist of it, which is, do you think it's effective to include TANF asset limit reform as part of an omnibus bill, or should you do it separately? Of the 8 states that have done this, they've all done it in different ways, some by legislation, some by rule. When it's a rule, it has to be specific. But, for example, when Ohio, the first state to eliminate TANF asset limits, did it, it was just one very small buried piece of their overall TANF program plan after welfare reform in 1996. So it is possible to do it as part of an overall TANF reform. But I think the way most states have done it since then has been by specific administrative rule, and in some cases, like in Colorado, Colorado initially did a raising of the limit and a carve-out of certain assets, and then after they saw how that worked for a couple years and looked at the administrative costs of applying the test to all these people, very few of whom had assets, then they decided to get rid of the test altogether. So you can do things incrementally as well, if you don't think you can pull off total TANF elimination in one fell swoop. I might throw in one other point. You know, as Dan and Lucy said, a big argument that was successful here and has been in other states is this concept of administrative cost savings, because caseworkers aren't wasting their time asking about assets that almost nobody has, and at the same time discouraging people from saving. But you might want to be careful to make sure in talking with your union allies and others that, as Dan said, that doesn't mean that you slash the budget or you lay off people. What it really means is you reallocate resources within the department to be used more effectively. So I think that's all we have time for, but thank you so much for participating. If you submitted a question we didn't get to, we will get you an answer by email, and the panelists encourage you to contact them for further consultation in the future. As I said, an archive of today's webinar, including the audio and the slides, and additional information will be posted to povertylaw.org tomorrow, and that will link you to other resources, fact sheets, FAQs, hearing testimony, and information on the bills that passed. Thanks again for joining us.